Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tom Oppenheim. I am the artistic director of the Stella Adler Center for the Arts, and I am so excited to present Poems That Saved My Life, a conversation with Sister Sonia Sanchez and Brother Reginald Dwayne Betts. Sister Sonia, poet, playwright, professor, activist, mother, board member at the Stella Adler Center for the Arts, my dear friend, our poet laureate, our guide and inspiration. We've recently named a scholarship in her honor, as well as the theater. She has truly transformed Adler. And this occasion is in celebration very much of her. Thank yous, my dear sister. Brother Betts, poet, memoirist, attorney, husband, father, actor, entrepreneur, creator of Freedom Reads. Freedom Reads, quoting from their mission statement, is a first of its kind organization that empowers people through literature to confront what prison does to the spirit. With Freedom Library and with literary programs, Freedom Reads supports the efforts of people in prison to imagine new possibilities for their lives. Freedom begins with a book. What excites me about this event is the story of the meeting of these two glorious poets and people. It's a story that is crucial in the history of American letters, in American history, in our ongoing fight for freedom and dignity. Sister Sonia and Brother Betts will communicate this story through their conversation. And before they do, just some quick housekeeping notes. The conversation will last for an hour. At 8 p.m. or so, my colleague Joanne Edelman will open the floor and take questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat. I'd like to end by reading a beautiful email I received from Dwayne that expresses for me the essence of this conversation and I think frames it beautifully. So when he refers to R for R, he's talking about Ritual for Return, which is a program in our Arts Justice Division, a theater program for returning citizens. And this email reads, Dear Tom, the world is quite small, or maybe just miraculous. I do know that I am always glad to find another occasion to mention how lovely Sister Sonia is. There are a few poets responsible for me imagining what's possible. Sanchez was one of the very first, and the first whose collection I purchased and carried around from cell to cell. The R for R program sounds great. One of the things I ask pretty often in my solo show is, name a song that tells a man what to expect after prison. The show is still in its very nascent stages. There is so much work to do, but it's a journey and I find myself growing as it grows. And whatever the case, it seems that Adler has created a worthy idea of what to expect after prison. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sister Sonia Sanchez and Brother Reginald Dwayne Betts.
Let's see, Reginald.
And we have made it.
Yes. Hello.
Hey, it's an honor to be able to talk to you. We could pretend like we don't have people listening to us, but I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yes. Oh, it's an honor to be talking to you too, my dear brother. You know, uh, most especially, after we had had some conversations, and then I got your book, and I sat up one night and went through it right away, almost like I used to do when I was much younger. I would sit up half the night after working and just read a new book that had come in. And I was so very much impressed with not just your writing, but also your discoveries and where you were, not only mentally, but spiritually. And I thought, what a wonderful young man this is, who has come amongst us to talk, to build, to make sure people get books. So therefore, perhaps they will. What happened to you, my dear brother, will happen to them also too. So, to read your work also, I knew at some point we'd get together and have a conversation about what happened to you, what is happening today, and what's happening tonight, as we talk amongst ourselves here and begin a dialogue about, you know, really what it means to be human in a short term at some particular point. So it's good seeing you again.
Yeah,
And I was thinking today,
go ahead.
I was thinking today how you reminded me how you had come and picked me up in a place called DC. You should tell the people that, right?
You know, so the thing is, they said, does anybody want to volunteer to go pick up Sister Sonia from the train station? And I said, sure, I'll do it. I knew I had no sense of direction. My wife will tell you to this day that I've gotten lost in grocery stores, but I so wanted to meet you that I said I will figure it out. And this is pre GPS, and I thought that we made it. I don't know how we made it,
We
but
did.
we made it. And I was like, the first, and I kept trying to talk to you, but I'm talking to you, my eyes not on the road. I was like, let me pay attention. It was harrowing, but I will never forget the experience because one of the things my friend called me, his name Anthony Wynn, and we all call him Absolute. And I remember, so I worked on his clemency petition, and I asked him to send me everything he's done while he was locked up, all of the programs. And I remember opening the packet that he sent me, and he had this it was called the Black Brilliance, right? And it was a brochure, a flyer for a Black History program from February 20th, 2003.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
the first time that I read a poem out loud. And me and him, we were on the same spot, and we walked the yard, talk about your work, talk about Sister Lucille Clifton. We talk about Yusef Komayaka, and it's an honor for me to like talk to you today, but also for him to be able to join, despite the fact that we still fighting for his freedom, but for him to be able to get a glimpse of this conversation, because I do think, I was fortunate to have your words, and I think he was fortunate to have your words remind us of our humanity and of our dignity and of the ability to like think and discover in print. And so it's nice to have him be able to like listen to this conversation because to this day, I think about I'm still learning both what it means to be a writer in the world. But I published poems for a year in the New York Times Magazine, and
Mhm.
and it's not that other people weren't generous and happy when I published their work, but you're the only person that called me. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, man, Sister Sonia don't want to be bothered with me. I was like, and it was late at night. And then you sent me a text message and you was like, brother, dear brother, call me now. And I was like, all right. And it was late. But the thing is, I was nervous because I was like, I didn't want to bother you. And it was such a generous moment, I think, from you that like nobody else showed. And it taught me something about what does it mean to be generous to other folks, because it was the thank you, but it was also like it led to these moments of like me and you getting a chance to talk about our fathers and about playing cards and and so I'm deeply touched by that.
No, it was an honor, and also, I always have these other motives, um, because I had told, Tom and Joanne that one of the things that has happened since this pandemic is that, I have a crazy schedule. Like I am a night writer. I would like, teach during the day, come home with the children, feed them, check homework, put clothes in the washing machine, sit down in my study and read all the papers that, or the poetry or the writings that my students had done. And then at about 12:30, I would do my work, and from 12:30 to 3:30, and then I go to sleep on the couch in my study with the fire going out in the fireplace, but with the alarm clock there. And then I would get up at 6:30 and go around knocking on the children's doors. So I get up and get dressed, whatever. And, and that's the way that I moved. But what I missed since this pandemic, actually a little bit longer, the last 4 or 5 years, is that I missed those calls that while I was up working, I knew it was one of my writer friends, right? And I pick and say, hello, who is this, right? Who's calling me at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, right? And we start laughing and they say, listen to what I just wrote, Sonia. And I said, yeah, I can do it because that'll go downstairs and get cigarettes like you, right? So I said, get your cigarette so we can talk. And I miss that. You have no idea I mean, you do. When you finish something and, you're just like, I come downstairs and get a cup of tea and go on the porch, and usually I just want to scream out loud that it's out. Hello. But when I do that sometimes, the next morning, people will look at me as I go for my walk and say, are you okay, Miss Sanchez, right? And I look, in a very proper fashion. Oh, yes, I am. And it would go on and do my morning walk. But my dear brother, I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to listen to what you had to say. I wanted to greet you, and say, what an honor it is to meet you, what an honor it is to know at some point that some of the work we had done and other people had done, moved you to write, moved you to go to another arena, moved you to move to an arena that says simply, I can do that too. Right, and like that little girl said, here I is, and so when you said here I is, we say, hallelujah, here we go. And so we greet you. Mm-hmm.
It was interesting too, because like that's how I worked. I learned how to write in prison, and I'm staying up all night because one, it's quiet. If you want to find quiet, you wait to like right. 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. And especially I did these long stretches in the hole, and in the hole you really wait till it's really late at night. In fact, my mom just sent me a stack of poems I had wrote, and they were all written, in 1998, 1999, and I can see all of my influences in the poems. I'm writing haiku, I'm writing tanka, and I remember during that time period, once somebody had sent me a letter, and we were so desperate to get poems. You couldn't, there was no library in that particular prison. And then the books that you came in with, you couldn't take them to the hole. And so the guys had set up a kind of underground library where if they had a book and you asked for one, they would give it to you. And I read everything. I read like a garbage fantasy novels. I read those Reader Digest forum ones. I was reading everything, but I had got the Black poets. And that's how I was first introduced to you. And then when I was telling a friend that I was into poetry, she had photocopied a bunch of your poems and then cut them up just in the shape because she knew that you could only have like X amount of pounds for one stamp. Wow. And she wanted to fill as many like poems in the envelope as possible. And I remember opening the envelope and not seeing anything and just like turning it over, and the poems just came down like, like manna from heaven or something. And I'm going through it because I'm trying to piece together like what pages go with what. And in the poem I remember distinctly from that time was a few, but I remember the Tupac poem. And that's what connected the generations for me, because I'm reading his work and I recognize your work from the Black Arts Movement, but in that moment it became contemporary. And it also said something to me about who I could be as a writer in terms of how it spans the generations. It's like, what it means to be contemporary is to keep noticing the world. And I think that's something that I try to do still now, but I think it's something that a lot of like I'm thinking of who is that Tupac of this generation that we're not writing about. Who are the actors? I actually realize now in this conversation that it's a part of the poetic work that we didn't do that you guys did. I learned about move from reading your poetry. And now I'm asking myself, what in my poems am I doing that sort of creating an archive for 5 years from now, for 10 years from now? Because, you know, I've written the poems about Tamir Rice, and I think that's really important. But I'm thinking about other stuff, because the poem I published in the Times was about the Holocaust. And so I'm thinking about the poems I write about the pipeline, so that, you know, 10 years from now, somebody's remembering that I cared about the pipeline too, or about Ukraine, you know, because I think everybody called me Shaheed in prison, and it's because I chose it because it means the witness. And now in talking to you, I'm reflecting. And I guess I'm wondering, actually, how did that sort of capacious intellectual curiosity develop, particularly in the constraints of everybody thinks about the Black arts movement as like being Black, when actually it feels like you guys had an intellect that was just as curious and as wide ranging as the way that you use words. And I wonder where that came from.
Oh, I don't know, other than the people who were involved with it. You know, Baraka said that one Sunday he had gone to the A Street bookstore for a reading, and someone came in and said Malcolm had been killed, had been shot. And he said they turned around and left the bookstore, the A Street bookstore. And at that time, on that day, he decided that he had to come uptown to Harlem, that he had to begin to continue Malcolm's work, that it was necessary, it was needed, and it had to be done. It was in that context that he came up from the village to a place called Harlem. And one of the things that that we talked about, that he sent letters to all of us, to the poets that he knew, and said, you know, that they were going to begin this this Black Arts Theater, and they were sending letters out to all the writers, the poets, the musicians, you know, and all these people in the arts to come and help us continue Malcolm's work. It was an amazing moment, because I remember reading it, and I remember that one of the last times I had seen him is that we had done a workshop with Louis Bogan, who was the editor of one of the big magazines in New York City at the time. And I did this, and we used to meet, and after we would go to a jazz joint, and we walked into this jazz joint, and I was coming in a little bit behind people because I had to find a parking space down in the village, and someone turned and said that's Leroy Jones sitting there, and I said mm-hmm. And I followed them on in, and I heard this voice that Sonia Sanchez. And I jumped. I literally jumped, because I knew it was he, right? And I turned around, and, I'm an ex-stutterer. If things aren't smooth, I might come out with some stutters, because I maintain that stutters are always residing right here at the back, at the bottom of the brain, at the beginning of the neck muscles, and will pop out on you. And so I turned and said, okay, Sonia. I said, yes. Yes, yes, Mr. Jones. And he said, I'm doing an anthology on African American, on Black poetry. And I'd like to have some of your poems, send them to me, And I said, I said, you want me to send you my poems? He said, didn't I just say that? And he was sitting with his hat, sitting acey-deucey. He was sitting I was looking at, the eyes, the writer, you're supposing you're looking at someone's eyes, but you're watching and seeing everything. He was smoking his gold-tip cigarette, and he was drinking this drink, right? So I'm catching all this. And I said, he said, send it to me in Eugen, okay. And he went back to work, because he was in this place. He was writing about the jazz that was being played there, because he said he needed to do that. So I walked inside, and the whole night, everyone there said, oh, that's Mr. Jones. I said, he doesn't know me. I said, I doubt if he's read me, because I was publishing in journals at that time, no book. But one of the ways that we had been taught on some levels is that you send out to magazines and they began that publishing. So it's a slow process. I said, I don't think he's read any of my poetry. But anyway, when we left that night, he was gone. And about 3 weeks, 2 weeks later, we come in after our workshop in the village on Charles Street, and he's sitting there, and I'm walking gingerly past him, and his voice said, Sanchez. And I jumped again. He said, you don't want to be in the book then, huh? And I turned and said, were you serious? He said, like, what's wrong with you, lady? I said goodbye to all my comrades, and I went out that door, drove up the West Side Highway in about probably 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes speeding. I went into my my apartment, pulled down my typewriter, got my journals, whatever, my books, whatever, and that's how I type, and typed those poems. Went out again, took those about 4 poems down, all the way down to the downtown post office in New York to make sure it got to him. And about 2 weeks later, I got this letter, and it said Eugen, and it said Jones. And I opened it, and he said, "Dear Sonia, yeah." So just yeah. I was expecting this long letter. I read your poetry and blah, 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 blah. And thank you for contributing. And it's going to be, yeah, exclamation point. That was it. And he signed his name, right? And the yeah was all that I needed. And that's how I really got into the Black arts, because they did come uptown, my dear brother, and got that brownstone there, and they sent out letters to all of us, all the artists and all the people, and said we're going to continue Malcolm's work. And for a while we went around saying Sonia Sanchez AM after Malcolm, whatever, because we knew that this was going to be serious business. But also at the same time, we were not crazy. We knew it was going to be, in a sense, hard work, dangerous work, and people were not going to relish what was to be done at that particular point. That was the beginnings of my writings, moving on a level with people who were there, from Larry Neal to Askia to Max Roach and Abby Lincoln. And let me just tell you this, and I'll go back to you, is that one Sunday, late afternoon, the sun was coming through the building. We were down in the basement, but they had these high windows, and the light was being filtered in. And then Abby Lincoln got up with this beautiful natural on her head, and she began to read an essay, "Who Will Revere the Black Woman?" And all these women who were in there, we were about 40 strong. We were all crying as she talked. This beautiful woman, this woman who we all wanted to look like. This woman that we wish we had written what she was saying at that particular point. But we listened, and we knew that we would come. We knew that we would change some things in a place called Harlem. We knew that we were going to come together. We knew that we were not at some point going to be the people that were needed in Harlem and in Jersey and in San Francisco, where we went later on, in Chicago and Detroit, in Atlanta, all over, because we were saying to the world, you got to deal with us on our terms, people, not your terms now. It was an amazing moment. And when Abby finished, all the women there were crying and wishing we could be as beautiful as she was, because she was a beautiful woman, and an amazing woman also too. And so, so there we were, moving, to talk about, that we are going to set the rules for our communities. We're going to set the rules for what we write. We're going to set the rules for what happens, to our students, because, they brought in every Saturday the students to teach them. And what was Sister Barbara Hamilton, who was married to Bob Hamilton, the poet. We began that whole process, writing out the curriculum, for the Saturday, bringing people and the children in to do stories, to do mathematics and all of that kind of stuff. But one thing that happened there at the Black Arts that was not controlled is that all the women were indeed had degrees, and some of us had gone back to grad school. And two of the men who had come from downtown with Baraka, Leroy Jones at the time, came in and said to us, we were working in the office upstairs on the top floor, "Come on, you people, you don't know anything about revolution. You're just these educated women, huh, with these degrees, and reading everybody on this earth. What?" And they sat down, began to teach us about revolution. And I remember looking, thinking, and they had a gun. And I remember thinking like, whoa, okay. And so it was reported to the people and to Baraka, and they said they'd take care of it. And so we came in because we were busy we had to get this program together because people were trying to get the HARU money to make sure we were able to educate all these children in this neighborhood. And they came and got us again. And I remember coming down the steps and being in this room, looking at these two young men and thinking about listening to my grandmother in Alabama when she and all those sisters from the church would get together, and they would say things like, like, don't ever let someone, do anything to you for 3 times. The third time, that is very dangerous. And I said to myself, this is the second time this has happened. And so we began to meet outside that building. At some point when you began to talk about doing good, my good brother, when you began to talk about this is what we're going to do, this is the beginning, new things, there are people who don't always understand that. And so sometimes it can be certainly a move for trying to not let it happen. But it did happen. The amazing thing happened. The musicians came in and they played the music. Baraka began to do the 1-act plays. We did poetry readings there. It was an amazing moment, and the children came in and learned what they needed to learn. And then an amazing thing happened. Larry Neal, there was a confrontation, and Larry Neal, the great poet, was shot, and then everything collapsed. And I remember leaving New York City, going to visit a friend of mine in California, and I said to her at one point, I said, I need different air. I need to climb the pyramids. And outside of Mexico City, you can take a bus and go up the pyramids, these pyramids that they had built. That's how I know how we're all related, because those pyramids were the same replica of what was going on in the place called Egypt and other parts of the world. And I remember getting on this bus, and going there and climbing up. It's very slippery to the top. And I said, and I breathed that fresh, new air. I cried on the top of that pyramid. I said, I don't know now what we're going to do. Everything seemed so clearly clear at that particular point. And then a voice said, anything you want to do, people will try to destroy it. Just go back home and let's see what happens. And the next day we were walking, Anita and I were walking in Mexico City there, and someone was on transportation, and I heard someone say, Sanchez! And, it's so loud. And I said to Anita, I mean, my goodness, even in Mexico City, you can't even walk the streets, right? And these people came running to me, and they were SNCC workers, had been SNCC workers. And they said, we've been trying to locate you, Professor Sanchez, Sonia Sanchez. We're going to start something called Black Studies. And we want you to teach the creative writing and the poetry. And I said, my father just told me, I called him. I said, my father just told me every time you go into something called Black something, it never works, right? But we had dinner together, and I gave him my telephone number in New York City. I said, call me when you get back, when you get back in California. And they called. And they said, we're coming in tomorrow. And do you know where Leroy Jones lives? And I said, yes, I do. He's back in Newark at this time. And I called Brother Baraka and told him some people were coming from San Francisco State. They're talking about Black Studies, right? You think that we should even involve ourselves with something called Black Studies right now. They're saying we're going to teach the students, or any student who walks into, about all the literature that has happened before. And we took these people, Garrett, uh, two sisters from SNCC, Brother Charles over, and we stayed up all night. We began to plan the whole idea of bringing Barack, when we got out there, to go in and start Black Studies, teach these courses, and Barack would be in charge of theater and all of the arts, period. And there we were, and we left out of Newark, New Jersey at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and it had begun. And we knew, and I told my dad, I think I'm going to go to San Francisco. He said, what are you going to San Francisco for, Sonia? I said, we're going to begin something called Black Studies. And he said, oh no, not again. And I said, yes. I'm sorry.
I know the people want to hear you read a poem. I know I want to hear you read a poem.
Okay. Okay. Let me read a poem that I did. They made a 5-minute documentary. Sister Nadine Patterson and Sister Marlene Patterson on this. When you go down to the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park and Visitor Center, they have on their names, and it says, we are free because of Harriet Tubman. And I begin with that. We are free because of Harriet Tubman, December 1850, Keziah Bowley, James Alfred Bowley, 6 years old, Araminta baby, John Bowley free. Early 1851, Moses Ross brother, unidentified man, unidentified man. Late 1851, unidentified man called brother, unidentified wife of brother, unidentified, 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 unidentified. Fall 1852, unidentified, 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 unidentified. Unidentified, 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 unidentified. June 1854, Winnebar Johnson. We are free because of Harriet Tubman, Christmas 1854. Robert Ross, alias John Stewart brother, Henry Ross, alias William Henry Stewart brother, Benjamin Ross Jr., alias James Stewart brother, Jane King, alias Catherine Stewart, Peter Jackson, alias Staunch Tillman, John Chase, alias Daniel Floyd, unidentified, possibly George Ross, unidentified, possibly William Thompson, unidentified, unidentified, unidentified. Early 1855, Harriet Ann Parker Ross, alias Harriet Ann Stewart, free wife of William Henry Ross Stewart Sr., William Henry Ross, free son of William Ross Stewart Sr., John Isaiah Ross, alias John Isaiah Stewart, free son of William Henry Ross Stewart Sr., December 1855. Henry Hooper probably got it. May 1856, Ben Jackson, James Coleman, Henry Hopkins, William Conaway, AKA Cook. We are free because of Harriet Tubman, October 1856, Tilly, November 1856, Hosea Bailey, William Bailey, Peter Pendleton, Elijah Manoki, May 1857, Harriet Green Ross, alias Harriet Stewart mother, Benjamin Ross, alias Benjamin Stewart father, December 1860, Stephen Enos, Maria Enos, Harriet Enos, Amanda Enos, Baby Enos, John Cornish, alias John Wesley Reed, likely unidentified woman, unidentified, unknown dates, Margaret Stewart, Anne Marie Stewart, Henry Carroll, Amelia Hollis, alias Amelia Millie Hollis Stewart, unidentified, 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 unidentified twin girl, unidentified twin girl, Haku and Tonka for Harriet Tubman. Picture a woman riding thunder on the legs of slavery. Picture a woman walking southern landscapes burning with moons. Picture her kissing our spines, say no to the eyes of slavery. Picture her rotating the earth into a shape of lives becoming. Picture her leaning into the eyes of our birth clouds. Picture a woman moving in winter black, bringing summer moons. Picture this woman saying no to the constant yes of slavery. Picture a woman jumping rivers, her legs inhaling moons. Picture her right with seasons of legs running. Picture her tasting the secret corners of woods. Picture her saying you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world. Imagine her words. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Imagine her saying, I freed 1,000 slaves, could have freed 1,000 more if they only knew they were slaves. Imagine her humming, how many days we got for we taste freedom? How many days we got for we taste freedom? Imagine a woman asking, how many workers for this freedom quilt? Picture her saying, a live runaway could do great harm by going back, but a dead runaway could tell no secrets. Picture the daylight bringing her to woods full of birth moons. Picture John Brown shaking her hand 3 times, saying, General Tubman, General Tubman, General Tubman. Picture her words, there's 2 things I got a right to, death or liberty. Picture her saying no to a play called Uncle Tom's Cabin. I say I am the real thing. Picture a black woman could not read or write, trailing freedom refrains. Picture her face turning southward, walking down a southern road. Picture this woman, freedom bound, tasting a people's preserved breath. Picture her singing red moons, surprising life. Picture this woman of royalty wearing a crown of morning air. Picture her walking, walking, running, running, reviving a country's breath. Picture her moon bent legs dancing inside freedom's guitar. Picture black voices leaving behind lost tongues. Picture her painting rainbows on a summer bent people. Picture a woman. I say, picture a woman walking on freedom legs, a sea spray of life, a sea spray of life, a sea spray of life. That's a piece for Harriet Tubman, a
Mm.
great woman, haiku sequence. Mm-hmm,
That was
mm-hmm,
yeah, that was fantastic.
mm-hmm.
I'm kind of speechless. It reminds me though that again, that's the sort of understanding that you got to tell the stories that nobody else tells, and understanding
Right.
that that's a part of the work of being a writer.
That's right.
It's and it's glad to continue to witness it, you know, and to be able to hear it and tell others about it and talk about it. It's
Mhm.
I'm really
You want
honored,
to read
you
a
know.
poem?
Not now. I did at first. I'm gonna,
Okay.
I'm gonna
Talk.
read one.
Okay.
Let me
Right.
see.
Mm-hmm.
Um. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna read this one. All right. It's called
Okay.
Volunteer Tomatoes.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Whatever about expectations. On a Monday, the small birds sing the same, and again, I do not call my father. There's something about these stories we don't tell. Once, he told me success is a synonym for random or coincidence, or as he called his favorite word, happenstance. He
Mm-hmm.
had never called me happenstance, but there's something of that to this. And so on one of those happenstance Mondays, I was in my garden, hoping to make more than my regret grow. Learning the weed is more proxy of science than science and more happenstance than skill, but I learned to notice what was new, and then decide if the new was beauty. I've always wanted to be called beautiful and held with the tenderness of a man sliding a tire into a car on a jack at midnight. Whatever about being held. On that Monday, I noticed the vines of a tomato and thought of my father. Did I mention he gardens? All of my stories are about this man. Once he told me about volunteer tomatoes. Said they only come to those who honor the gift of fruit unasked for. I took off my gloves before tenderly touching the green globes. Such a certain kind of surprise, a wonder, something left over by a visitor I might not have wanted, some squirrel or bird or God. And though the green thing in my hand was not rightly yet a tomato, I sank my teeth into its not yet tender flesh.
Mm, 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 mm.
Now I probably call you one morning at like 2 o'clock and be like, yo, look, I got this poem that I just wrote and I needed somebody to hear it, especially under the night sky when it was written.
Well, that's what this is all about. As far as I have got to get I got to recruit some people that I can do this with. Okay, so everyone heard you. Did you hear him say that, people? Okay, I will call you if he doesn't do it. Okay, yeah,
No,
that'd be nice. I miss that. I mean, you have no idea just how I miss. Mm. Because I write at night. I mean, and that's habit from being a professor for what 44 years. And so the only time I had a chance to write was always at night. And after you did all the work that you had to do for the next morning and all the papers you had to read for the next morning, so that was so important, to me. And so I did that at night. And I was talking to a dear friend who died a couple of years ago, and she said, "Well, I don't know how you write after you do all that work at night. You have to go to sleep and then wake up. You wake up at about 4 or 5." And I said, "I can't do that. But if I'm on this, come home and I do this, I'm on this, what I call on this trail, of excitement, because each time I did something, threw something in the washing machine, right, and did the dishes, and as I was writing or looking at each thing that someone else had written in my writer's class, right, it was leading me more and more to like that little pile on my desk where I wanted to get to, where I was going to go in and begin to write and not even know, I would look up and it would be, 4 o'clock. And I cannot tell you, how I got to 4 a.m. in the morning, from beginning maybe at 1 o'clock, after I finished, reading people's work, and making comments and things like that. But there I was, and I would just go and stretch out on the couch. I had always had a clock in every room where I was. And I pulled the alarm up and slept until about 6:30 and began that ritual of getting up, all of us, let's get ready. I got to drop you off for school, and I got to get into to my first class at 8:40 a.m., right? And begin the day. That is the joy of beginning the day at that particular point, of
you know what I
moving.
wondered?
Mhm.
You know what I wondered too was you talking about joy and writing. You guys wrote a lot of plays, and you wrote a lot of plays too.
Oh,
I
right.
I,
Mhm.
I wrote my own recently, and part of the reason why I wrote it is because like my son was like, your poems are always so dark, and I was trying to find a way to write something that had some light in it, and I was
Uh-huh.
trying to find a way to present the stuff that was dark in a way that was funny and engaging and wasn't just, so
Right.
I said, I'm gonna turn it into a play and it'll have more than just whatever's in the poem. But it's
Mhm.
been a journey. It's like I never memorized anything before. And when you get on stage in front of people, all of a sudden, you got to do different stuff with your voice. I'm on a
Right.
stage singing. I ain't never sung in my life, and right now I'm singing like some Buju Banton on the stage. But the point is like I don't have I can't carry a note to save my life. And what I wonder though is I find myself imitating the legacy that comes from you, from Lucille Clifton, from Baraka. And I guess it makes me wonder though, because nobody told me to write a play. You know, nobody told me my first job out of prison was teaching poetry to children. And nobody, this is the only place I was welcome, you know, to tell the truth, right? And I was good at it. And the children welcomed me. They was like, yo, Mr. Dwayne got skills, he cares about us, and I was good at my job. But nobody told me that that mattered. And I'm listening to you talk about teaching in Harlem, talking about it was an impetus. This was the work. The work wasn't necessarily a Pulitzer Prize, even though that's a part of the work too. The work was like engaging with the folks in this community. And I guess I wonder where that comes from, because now I find myself, without actually intending to, like going back to that model, going back to like, what does it mean to find ways to be more involved in the community? What does it mean to do theater? Because I do theater because my mom ain't gonna read my poetry book. I mean, she might be watching this and be like, "I read your book, boy. Don't be saying that out loud in public." But like my folks would come to a poetry reading if it's me. And it's like, but then I want to do it in a way in which they will bring other people out to it. And that's what a play does that sometimes the poems don't. So I wonder what got you into that, this idea of like, doing plays.
Right. But but a funny thing happened when the people came from San Francisco State and I took them over to meet Baraka in New Jersey, to meet Baraka and Larry Neal. They were editing a book called Black Fire, which was the only book, the first and only book at the time that was done on the Black arts. Luckily enough, SOS, this is 20 years later or more, this is the second book done on the Black arts, believe it or not, that we did with Professor Bracey and Professor Smethurst and myself, called SOS, Calling All Black People. And and there we were, at some point trying to figure out, what that meant, what we were going to do, how we were going to move, and so the people came into town, and I took them over to meet Baraka and Larry Neal, and they said they were doing this book called Black Fire, and Baraka said, "You've written a play, haven't you, Sanchez?" And I said, "Yeah." The first play I had done, oh gosh, don't tell me I've forgotten the first play I've done. That's weird. But the first play that I had done at that particular time, I said, yeah, they said, we want to put it in Black Fire. And I said, oh, great. And then a funny thing happened when we left out of there. There was no way that I could find it. I never was able to find it at any particular point. But what I do know, finally, it was called The Bronx is Next. Because we were doing plays, like 30-minute plays, 1-hour plays that we did down in the Village area. To grab people's attention, plays with a message, and I did that play, but I could not find it. No, that's not true. I found it and I sent it to Larry, and then they could not find it, so it was not in the first book, Black Fire, that we had done some years ago. But I went to San Francisco State, and Ed Bullins, a great playwright,
Yeah.
just like Baraka. Called me one night and said, "Sonia, you do plays, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm in the trying to find. I finally found that play, but it's being published in New York, and I don't have a copy." We had just moved out to San Fran, and he said, "Well, you have some other plays, and this is the thing you must always do. You must always say, yes, I do have another one."
I know. That's the story of my life.
Although there's no other place, no place, any place. And they said, "Yes, what is the name of it?" And I said, well, I have a couple of names, right? I mean, just completely, lying, whatever. And I said, but I think I'm going to call it Sister Sonji, because I like this out. And Ed said, good, we'll come around. I'll send someone from San Francisco State and they'll pick it up tomorrow. Or you send some students. I had students who lived over me there in San Francisco in the house I was living in. And they'll bring it and they'll type it up for, he said, good, I want it because we're going to publish it, right? And we're going to do it also too. I sat down in that living room on a couch, and I sat there and wrote that play. I mean, I stayed up all night, and my twins were just 3 months old at the time, if you're ready for that. And they had never slept straight during the night. When I put them down, I separated them because they kept each other awake, talking all the time. And I said to each one, now you have to go to sleep. Right, you have to sleep tonight. Because I got to write a play. I sit there and wrote that sucker longhand. Can you imagine that? And the students, I called the students who lived over me and said, you need to take this into to the college and type it up. Bring me back a copy. You know, Mimeo, we used to Mimeo. Everything was purple and blue at that time, and you Mimeoed all day. And so I can look and make sure it's okay. And we got it to Ed Bullen's. So if anyone says to you, do you write plays? You know, right? Say, yes, I do. And they'll say to you, well, can you send me one in a week? Sit down and begin writing that play because you got it up here someplace already. I had that play already in my head with some words, my dear brother, you know?
So see, I've been telling, I'm writing an op-ed for the New York Times and it hasn't been written yet. And I've been, you know, it's been about 2 weeks since I told him I would write it. And the op-ed is about returning to prison to install a library.
Right.
And let me show you actually. And so the libraries, they're modular and they look like this.
Oh, look at that. Yeah.
And they're modular so that like,
oh my God, oh, that's nice. Oh, that is nice.
And you can access it from both sides.
Yeah.
And depending on how the unit looks, you can shape it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. Yeah.
And it's about 40 inches high. Each one of the modules, each one of these holds between 120 and 180 books. And so I told him, I said I read an op-ed about what it's meant to return it. The first prison we put it at was MCI Norfolk in Massachusetts, where Malcolm X was locked up.
That's right. I was going to say that's so.
They gutted out a prison cell for us to put the library in the prison cell. And then the second one we did a couple of other spots in Massachusetts, and then we did Angola in Louisiana.
Angola.
And I'm trying to write a piece about what it means to return to a prison as somebody who, you know, I went in as a child, and I'm returning and I became a poet inside, but I'm returning as a father, you know, and I'm returning as a published poet, you know, I'm returning as an educator, I'm returning as a lawyer.
That's your beginning.
Yeah.
I went in prison as and now I'm returning as writer, a man, whatever, etc. And you go right, you'll be able to go right into it. That's your beginning. It's a beginning that will draw people towards that article, you know, because that's what when you went in as you have to make it, you know, very dramatic on many levels, you know, but I'm now returning to prison, you know, as a you know, whatever. But that's an interesting beginning there. That is I have tears in my eyes because, my dear brother, you know, sometimes you don't know what, and I don't want to get cliche-ish, but what life holds for you sometimes, you know, sometimes you turn around and wonder, what am I doing here in this prison? I mean, why am I here? How did I get here? And how will I get out of here? You know, and then things happen there, you know, books appear, people are sharing books with you. People understand sometimes the need for other people to, they need to read, they need to understand something beyond what is happening in a prison cell. And that happened with you and other prisoners there too. And you began that move towards something that you were meant to do on this earth. And we never know why we take these strange roads sometimes to get to where we think we would have gotten to anyway, if we had stayed out, but we don't know that at all. What we do know that you went in and you came out with different information, different eyes actually, and a different heart, I think also too, and a different mentality at some point, that you were now moving in another direction towards something, towards what you were put on this earth to do, my dear brother, and that is what you're doing now, and the work in that prison to give those books to make sure those books come in for those prisoners who will at some point look at a book and have a revelation. When I went out looking for a job, my dear brother, it was an ad in the New York Times in New York. I just graduated. I just turned 20 from college. I was going to start taking courses in September, and my father said, you need to get a job. And so I went out when I saw some ads, and every place I went, they said, no, we're not hiring. No, we're not hiring. No, ignore that, whatever. And I knew what that was all about. I was this young Black woman trying to get a job someplace. And my dad kept saying, well, you can always come work down where I'm working at some point. And I said, no, I'm going to try again. So I answered, and I got the New York Times, and I went through all the ads there. And I answered this ad in the Times that they wanted a writer for a firm. And I had to send an example of my writing, and a CV, right? And I did that. And for this audience that's here, I got a telegram. Some of the young people might not know what a telegram is, right? But it came Saturday morning, and it said, report to work on Monday at 9 a.m. I had the job. I was going to be a writer for a firm downtown. Can you imagine? And so I remember rushing out, and I had one blue suit, getting it pressed, whatever, et cetera, and shining up my shoes and put these heels on my blue suit and this hat sitting, like really, AC-doocy, whatever, with a blue purse and white gloves. Went downtown for this job with the telegram in my purse. And instead of getting there, they said report at 9 a.m. I got there at 8:30 and was waiting outside for people to come. And I heard this clicking, clicking, clicking of heels coming down the hallway. And the woman stopped. She says, yes, can I help you? I said, yes, you can. And I picked up the telegram, and she looked at the telegram. She looked at me. She looked at the telegram again. She looked up at me again. She looked at the telegram a third time, and she looked up at me and handed it back and said, open the door. She said, come in and have a seat. And I sat down, put the telegram away in my purse. By now, it's about 8:45. They had this big clock in there. And she left and came back and sat down, and started typing the old-fashioned typewriter. And a head came around the corner and looked like that. And another head came around the corner and looked like that. And this man came in the door and said, yes, can I help you, miss? And I stood up and I walked across the room and I handed him the telegram. And he looked at the telegram and he looked at me. He did the same thing, looked at the telegram and looked at me. He looked at the telegram and looked at me again and handed it back and said, I'm sorry, the job is taken. I said, oh, I'm from New York, my New York humor. I said, I got it. I came too early. I'm going to go outside the door. I'll be back in at 9 o'clock. The telegram said, come at 9 o'clock. I will go back and I'll come in at 9 o'clock and everything will be okay. The guy did not smile, did not say, that's correct. He said, I said the job is taken. And the way he said it was such disdain. And I said, I said, I got it. You're discriminating. I'm going to report you to the Urban League. He shrugged his shoulders. Lady, I don't care who you report this to. And I remember walking out with tears in my eyes, going to the subway, getting on the subway, just crying. People were looking at me. And I got on the subway in New York City. I had to get off the subway at 94th, 96th Street. Whoa, it's been that long. And to stay on the west side. And I was sitting there and the door closed and I realized I had missed my stop. And this subway train would go to the east side and I would be deposited at 135th Street in front of Harlem Hospital. And I crossed the street. And as I crossed the street, I went about a fourth in the block and there was a sign that said Schomburg Library. And there was a guy outside smoking a fast cigarette. And I said, excuse me, sir, what is the Schomburg? He said, lady, go inside, sign the book, go up the steps and you'll see. And I did all that. And I came into this huge, huge room with these long tables and nothing but Black men were sitting there with books stacked very high. And they had the heads down working. And I came to a door, a glass door, and I knocked on a door. And Miss Hudson, who was the curator there, said, yes, my dear, can I help you? And I said, yes, what is the Schomburg? She said, oh, my dear, the Schomburg has books only by and about Negroes, you see. And I said with my smart 20-year-old mouth, I said, there must not be many books in here, huh? She never, ever let me forget that. I would bring my classes from Amherst College to spend a whole day in the Schomburg, from Philadelphia. From New York City, we spent the day in the Schomburg, right? But she sat me down and says, just sit here, I'm going to bring you something. And she brought me 3 books, Up From Slavery, Souls of Black Folk, and The Eyes of Watching God. And the Eyes of Watching God was on top. And I pushed the other 2 to the side. And when my ears and my eyes became accustomed to the Black English, it's not dialect, it's Black English that they're speaking. I pushed the book away. I eased my way out because she had packed us in like sardines. And I knocked on the glass door. I said, but how can I be a graduate of Hunter College and never come across this book? She said, oh, my dear, go sit down and read. I have plenty of books for you. And I edged back in and sat down and I started to read. And I got about to a third of the book because I had to train my ear for that Black English, although we spoke Black English at home. But here I was reading it. It was written out. And I was going at a slow pace. And I said, I got up again, I eased out and I knocked on the door. And she told this story to all my students. I was crying. I said, no. How could I be an educated woman and not come across this book? She said, oh, my dear, sit down. I'm going to give you lots and lots of books, for the rest of, whatever. And I sat down and this African man stood up and said, Miss Hudson, tell this young woman either she has to sit still or she has to leave. And I sat still for for the rest of the winter and summer. And I finished up, and the reasons why I could teach Black Lit at a place called San Francisco State, coming full circle, is that she had let me read these books, and she sent me to Mr. Michaud, and Mr. Richard Moore, who owned bookstores there in Harlem. And they all gave me 2 big paper bags full of books, one from Michaud, the Afro-American Lit, and the others from Brother Richard from the West Indies, right? And I brought those books home. That is why when they said, let us go to teach at San Francisco State, they said, who would teach the Black literature and who would teach the writing? And they said, Sanchez. She's always talking about these books, somebody by the name of Du Bois, somebody by the name of Richard Wright, all these books. We'll get her and she can do it. And there we were, my dear brother, beginning that whole movement of teaching, not only Black students, but white students, everybody who wanted to come. They knew there was something special happening. They knew there was something they had missed. And our classes were full of these students who came in. They were sitting in the hallway. They were sitting on the bulletin board. They were sharing seats, whatever. And I came in and I was a young professor, people, this young, and I was scared stiff. And I said, I can't let them see that I'm scared, whatever. And I came in and I went around the room. There was a blackboard all the way around the room. And I wrote all the names of all the people that we were going to teach in here. And the students only recognized one name or two names, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. They didn't recognize Du Bois, none of the writing, the writers that we were going to, and I said at the end of the semester, you will know these people. And that was the joy, of that, having taught that and having those students look up, and they would come in, they would rush in, they would come before I got there, 30 minutes before, to get their seats and to pull other chairs from other rooms so therefore we could be packed in like sardines. But there we were beginning something called Black Studies in a place called San Francisco State. So nobody coming through the university would come in and not see themselves, not see their beauty, not see their humanity. They were going to see that, period. Right.
They're gonna. That's such a great story. They're gonna make us answer some audience questions. But I am so happy to hear that story. And it reminds me why I mean, not like lucky to go to prison, but when I went to college, like I knew Zora Neale Hurston, I knew Richard Red, I knew Ellison, I knew Sanchez, I knew Coleman Yaka, I knew Afar Weaver. Right. Like I had this whole bandwidth of literature that I had discovered in these cells. And so it made me a different kind of student when I came in, because I sort of felt like I had developed this like insatiable thirst, but also understanding and desire to know more about Black literature before I even knew it was a thing that you could learn in a classroom. I was just like, they were just books to read. So, all right, if we don't answer questions, they're never going to invite me back again.
Actually, that's not true. We have a plan for you, our dear brother Dwayne. We have a plan for you at the Stella Adler Center for the Arts. Well, thank you both for allowing us to listen in. I did feel as though I was sitting in our dear sister Sonia's living room, just listening in. So one of the questions is, would you please tell us some of the poems that you felt changed your life? I know our dear sister Sonia's poems have changed our lives, but what poem, dear sister, has changed your life?
Oh my gosh.
I know. There she gets her file out.
Yeah, I had it right here. I have the poems right here that I wanted to read. I marked them already. But I also, Marani also came and made more room for me.
Well, it's Marani's fault. He moved them.
Can you imagine that? I can blame my son for this, okay? But here's one from the Black poets here. And one of the poems in here is a poet by the name of Sterling Brown. And I'm sure our dear brother, Brother Dwayne knows Sterling Brown. But in what I said at that point there at the Schomburg, I was fed poetry. You have no idea what that was, that I came out and what it was that they gave me these books, also. But here's a poem by Sterling Brown, the great poet, right? Who wrote a poem called Old Limb, and I won't read it all, but I just began the beginning, but it's an amazing poem. I talked to Old Limb, and Old Limb said, they weigh the cotton, they store the corn, we're only good enough to work the rows. They run the commissary, they keep the books. We gotta be grateful for being cheated. Whippersnapper clerks call us out of our names. We got to say master to spindling boys. They make our figures turn somersets. We buck in the middle, say thank you, sir. They don't come by ones, they don't come by twos, but they come by tens. And I know you know that poem, my dear brother. You know, it's an amazing poem. And it goes on. It's they got the judges, they got the lawyers, they got the jury roles, they got the law. They don't come by ones. They got the sheriffs, they got the deputies. They don't come by twos. They got the shotguns, they got the ropes. We got the justices in the end, and they come by tens, and they come by tens. You know, and then it goes on much longer, you know, and where he talks, that poem is an amazing poem. When I first read that poem in the Schomburg, you know, I, the men who came there regularly, the scholars, they got to know me and they would make room for me. Isn't that amazing? Because they knew that I was not the scholar, but they would make the space for me. You okay? You okay, Miss Sanchez? You okay? Yes, I am. And my books would be stacked up there, but I had begun to bring my notebook, you know, to make my notes, whatever. And there I was. You have no idea. I knew that I was a part of history and history at that time. But that's one of the poems that anyone sitting in the audience should read that poem by the great Sterling Brown. And of course, a man by the name of Langston Hughes, right? I mean, anyone who wants to understand this poetry would read The Negro Speaks of Rivers, you know, and memorize it as we all had to memorize it. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. You know, I came across all of these things, and I still have that journal, that book, a bunch of the books from there. That's when I first started to use like just these notebooks, right? But I was reading the poems and my comments that I made at the same time, and also the memory, you know, that at some point this man, Langston Hughes, made connections for me, you know, a poet from New York City, you know, I from New York City. So when I meet him for the first time at a reading, I thought I would go up and tell him, I first read you in the Schomburg, but I was so shy, you know, and I came up and he extended his hand and I went, you know, whatever, you know, really dumb, and backed off the stage. I'm surprised I didn't fall off the stage, right? Because you know, you're meeting this great poet, you know, and you know, like, oh, you know, who are you, right? You know, at this point, and he there were other people waiting for him, and all these people surrounding him, and here I was, this person just, you know, out of wherever I was, out of Hunter College, right? Getting ready to go to NYU to take some courses, and also to come to meet a woman by the name of Louise Bogan, the great Louise Bogan, you know, who taught a poetry class in a place called NYU in New York City. And I had tried when I left the Schomburg, I had tried so hard to get in these workshops during the summer. And every time I went and I read something, you know, which was not, you know, the greatest poem, whatever, it was a class of nothing but men. 12 men usually, 14 men, and I was the only female and the only Black sitting there. And I would read the poem, raise my hand, you know, to read it, and no one responded. You know, not even the teacher responded, just silence. And then he would say, who would like to read next, whatever. And I knew that I had to leave that room. After about 2 or 3 sessions, I left, and I went other places. And I was blessed then at NYU to meet Louise Bogan. But can I just tell you a story as an aside about being human? Some years later, during the Vietnam War, I was called to come, and they asked me would I come and do a reading. They had it downtown at one of the big buildings downtown. And the same person that who had ignored me when I had been a younger person, there, came up to me and hugged me and said, "Oh, Sonia Sanchez, oh, I love your poetry. Thank you for agreeing to come. And you are the only person that said you weren't going to charge any money, whatever." That's what we did all the time, that. And thank you so much. And oh, again, and hugged me again. But I was with a dear friend who was a writer. And I told that story to her many years ago. And she said, "Ooh, why didn't you curse him out, Sonia? You know what I mean? Jimmy, this is a man that didn't respond to you at all, and blah, 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 blah." And I said, "My dear sister, you think people can't change. I know people can change." I said, "This man, when he walked up to me and I saw him, I heard in his voice, he had changed. He had moved to another point." And that's the whole point about this, that in this arena that we work in, this arena of poetry and short stories and plays, this arena, I said, we're in a holy place. And every place I go, I try to make it a holy place, you see. And so therefore, I had made I was satisfied when I saw him walk towards me. I had no hatred or anything towards this man at all, So again, we extended that holy place to him, and here we were, doing some good work about against the war in Vietnam. It was a holy place at that point, and I just wanted to share that at some point, that we don't go around with our hearts so gnarled up that you did this to me 20 years ago, and by God and by G, I'm going to curse you out. No, you came in a welcoming embrace, and I responded, because that is what we must do, not only in this country, but in the world, as we see war raging again, overseas in Europe.
Yeah. One of the things I always thought was that the poems allowed me to believe that I could be more than the thing that I had did to get in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, the poems helped me believe that other people could too. Because it was always tension, and it was always like, how do you respond to the most recent slight? I remember reading Cutting Greens by Lucille Clifton, and I'll tell you my story.
Mm-hmm.
I'll read the poem. It's Cutting Greens. So what happens is what happens is when I get the Black poets, I'm in solitary confinement, and then I get this magazine where you can buy books from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I buy your book and I buy The Art of War. I convinced myself that The Art of War is going to teach me how to fight. And this is the thing. It did not teach me how to fight. It didn't teach me Kung Fu, Jiu-Jitsu, karate, none of that. It was like teaching me to take the high ground, but all of the ground was flat in prison. So it wasn't helping me at all, right? And the thing that actually did teach me, because you got to understand, I was like a kid, and I was a sarcastic, I believed I was smarter than everybody else, and I couldn't fight, which is not a recipe for surviving prison. And like, in the way that I survived was the poems, because the poems actually taught me to think about the world in a different way. And because I started to think about the world in a different way, and I started to write, I mean, people thought about me in a different way. My folks now who have known me for decades will say, yeah, this is only one person in my life has not been surprised that I got into Yale besides my mom. It's this dude that I knew. I remember we were so desperate to read books, right? And it was like a thing, we would get the book and share it with each other. And they had these yellow lines that you weren't supposed to cross. And I was a consummate line crosser, I just crossed the line just to break the rules. And my man had got a new book, and he's like, "Yo, Shahid, you got to come check this book out." And I crossed the line to look at the book, and he slides it through the door, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, "Oh man, let me read this joint when you finish." He's like, "Yo, you can read it now. You can read it first." So I got the book. I go to get my tray, and the CO was like, "You going to the hole, Betts. I told you about crossing those lines." So they put me in handcuffs, and they put me in a sally port, and people start banging on the door. Like, if Shahid go to the hole, I'm going to the hole. Some kid on the top floor who I knew, but I didn't know that well, he kicks his locker out in the hallway. I'm going to the hole too. Me and this dude, we knew each other, but we weren't even friends. The guy who gave me the book, he's snapping, he's banging on his door. So now the lieutenant is like, "Betts, you always causing problems. Just go to your damn cell and take the book with you," right? So it's funny But the dude who kicked his locker out about 15 years later, I'm out of prison. I'm in law school. I just finished law school. He asked me to help him to get out on parole. He asked me to represent him. So I represent him. And the wild thing is the only way that I'm able to represent him, I'm working in Philly. I'm working for a judge in Philly. And the judge lets me write about Kamala Harris. And so because I have to travel to South Carolina, I say, I'm gonna write about Kamala Harris because I hope that she's in South Carolina when I need to be in Virginia for his parole hearing. She happened to be in South Carolina that weekend. So I was able to go represent him in parole only because she was in South Carolina. And then he gets out of prison. So then 3 years after this, he's at a party and he sees my guy. His name was, it doesn't matter what his name was, but his name was T. He sees T and he's like, and Luke is like, yo, you talk to Shaheed, you know he a lawyer. He's like, he a lawyer. I ain't talked to him since, he ain't talked to me in 20 years. So he calls me. He's like, yeah, I heard you went to law school. I was like, yeah, I went to Yale. He's like, you went to Yale? He's like, you know what? That sounds about right. And it's like the only person. And it's so interesting when I think about how I developed through books and through reading, but I also developed my personality, but I think I also developed how people saw me, Let me read this poem because I ain't even read it yet. Cutting Greens. I didn't know you could write about, just didn't understand the idea of metaphor until I read this. And I just thought, man, the last line is, and I sense the bond of Black things everywhere. And I never forgot about it. But it says, cutting them around, I hold their bodies in obscene embrace, thinking of everything but kinship. Collards and kale strain against each strange other, away from my kiss-making hand in the iron bed pot. The pot is black, the cutting board is black, my hand, and just for a minute, the greens roll black under the knife, and the kitchen twists dark on its spine, and I taste in my natural appetite the bond of live things everywhere. I honestly, I remember, it's a bunch of poems though, but I remember reading these poems and being transfixed because I didn't imagine that people took the time to notice the world that we lived in that way. And everything I knew about my own community, and not to be melodramatic, but it wasn't like celebrated in a way that imagined that you can have, like when Nikki Giovanni said, they'll never understand that Black wealth is Black love. Like I heard that and I thought, man, I got a different way to think about how I exist in this world. And yeah, it was, and the dude that gave me the Black poets, he looked at me and was like, Shaheed, it looked like you would like this book. It's just like, what? But he was right though. And it was the same dude who had a knife buried on a rec yard. So people will always never just one thing, people just would never one thing. And he was the one who gave me the book that just opened up another world of poetry to me. Cause this was more, post World War II poets. It was kind of different. It was the thing that followed the Black poet. So
we have another couple. Oh, I'm sorry. We have another couple of questions. Do you have some time? We're running a little late. What do you say?
I do.
Yes?
Do you, my brother?
Yeah, we could take a couple more. It's cool.
Okay. What is the thing that drives you? What keeps you going? What, whether you're tired or hopeless, what is it that says, I'm just going to write another poem. I'm going to do another show?
Oh, I don't deal with hopeless. I mean, I've been desperate before. A judge told me I'm under no illusion that sending you to prison will help.
Huh.
But you could get something out of it if you want. And I've never forgot that he said that out of me and said that to me. I was 16, I was 120 pounds. And if I wasn't hopeless then, I so I don't deal with hopeless. And I write because I've never been able to not write. So
what about you, my dear sister? What keeps you going?
I think like, some people are born who are good with science and mathematics, and music. I think people are born, with a sense of the world and the beauty, and the ugliness in the world also at the same time. that they are born with words that come out of their mouth. I was told, I don't remember, but I was told that by people in my family that I used to always sort of speak, um, um, uh, you know, and they said poetry, but what they were probably saying, it was a rhythm attached to it, right? I was living with my grandmother at the time in Birmingham, Alabama, and I did not stutter while she was alive. And you know, as a consequence, you know, I would say these things, and they would say, "Oh, isn't that cute?" You know, and so I used to beg my aunties to help me. Show me. My mama would say, "Show that girl how to write and read at the same time. She's bothering me all the time." And so they bought these little children's books, you know, the little easy ones, and they began the whole process of teaching me how to read. I was 4 years old. And as a consequence, when my sister, who was 6 and a half, 6, went to first grade, you know, in Birmingham, Alabama, my dad was a teacher, school teacher there. And they say I cried and stamped my feet and ran through the house saying, I want to go to school too. And my dad knew the principal because they were all school teachers. He was a high school teacher, you know, and a musician. And they said, oh, let Sonia go and just sit. You know, it'd be something for her to do, you know, and she could see her sister. The problem was that I ended up learning everything that everybody else learned, right? And as a consequence, you know, when I cried at the next time for graduation promotion, you know, they promoted me, and I began at home with Mama before she died. You know, the writing of these little ditties, the little poems, dun 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 kind of thing, and they kept what they were. Oh, she writes poetry. I don't know whatever happened to those poems at all. But I knew at that point that that I was intrigued by. I've always been intrigued by words, you know, and I'm told that I would sit in a corner when Mama was cooking, and I would throw out words. I would just say words that rhymed at some particular point. So yeah, you know, that's what I did. That's how I moved. Uh, Knowing at some particular point that I love words. And after my grandmother died, and I began to do that stuttering, I became more and more involved with just writing because it was an easier thing for me to do than to speak. And it was never an easy thing to read, however. You know, I never volunteered to read, you know, during those early years in school because of that, unless I practiced it before, period. But that's how I did, and I moved. You know, in those early years, that I think poets are born. I think writers are born. They don't always find their way right away. They might not be children who write little ditties or write little poems, whatever, but eventually through some way, through this maze called life, they get to it. And one day they look up, you know, as I'm sure my dear brother looked up and said, I can write. By golly, by gee, look at this. You
Yeah.
know, this is what I'm supposed to do. And that's, you know, what I discovered. You know, also all those years I was still writing. Would never read the stuff aloud in high school. Would never read anything in college. Uh, Took a writing class, and because I wrote about something that my dad had gotten upset about in New York City in an elevator, this man put his hands on his head and said, and patted my father's head. And he was so angry. My father, who was a kind, gentle man, slammed the door coming home and said, how dare he put his hands on my head and pat my head in that fashion. And I realized listening to him that at some point there could be some things that could happen to Black men in the South, like someone patting him on the head as if he happened to be an animal that would make him then curse. My father never cursed, but he cursed that day. He was so angry. Um, but what I learned also too, that I did a little poem about it. you know, that I hid my poems under the bathtub in the bathroom, because I shared a room with my sister and she was always nosy. And so that's what I did, because I cleaned the bathroom on Saturdays, you know, so I could hide my things there. And I just wrote. And I did it, but I never wanted to read it after Mama died, simply for the reason that you know, I couldn't do it the way I wanted to read. And it took Louise Bogan, you know, she had us read our poems aloud. It was an amazing thing. And she took us to see other poets read. And on the way back to our classroom there at NYU, she would say, "Isn't he a terrible reader?" I'll never forget that. And I wanted to say it, but I couldn't say it, right? And she said, "That's why when I say to you, you must read your poems out loud. You must train your ears to hear what is working and not working, but read it aloud. You just can't get up with a poem after you write it and just read it. No, practice reading it, practice." And that's what I did. I practiced reading poetry. I practiced it. I made my ear, you know, listen to it and tell me about the hesitations and what was going right and what was going wrong on many levels. Yeah.
And so thank you so much, Sonia Sanchez, Reginald Dwayne. That's
yeah.
If you don't have these books, go out and get them. Really, we thank you so much for your extraordinary generosity. We went way over time. We have lots of wonderful questions, which we cannot get to, but I did want everyone, what? We'll get the questions to you. We're going to capture the chat and get you the questions. Okay. But everyone, our dear sister Sonia Sanchez, not only is she our poet laureate, but she will be our poet in residence next year. So we will have all of our readings with our dear sister Sonia Sanchez. And we will for sure, once you've read at the Stella Adler Center for the Arts, you come back and you come back. It's never just a one-off. All right, everybody.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you,
guys.
everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.